It is the time of year when a lot of people spend an unusual amount of time thinking about death. In late October to early November, there are a number of holidays, like the famous Halloween, a day of ghosts, ghouls, and trick-or-treating and jack-o'-lanterns. But there's also the very closely connected days of All Saints' Day and its companion All Souls' Day. These three all fall at around the same time, and the relationship and difference between them can be a little confusing to a lot of people. I think most of you know what Halloween is, and if you don't, I've made an episode previously about that, which you can check out. But how about those other ones, All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day? What are these holidays? Where do they come from? And how are they celebrated today? All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day are two interconnected holidays that take place in late fall, specifically in early November. They are, at their core, a Christian tradition. All Saints' Day is a day of commemoration of the Christian saints and martyrs, a practice that has a long and interesting history, and which is, to complicate things further, very strongly connected to the holiday of Halloween. As such, we must begin our exploration of this topic in the ancient Celtic pagan festival known as Samhain. Celebrated in pre-Christian times and beginning on October 31st, this was a festival that marked the end of summer and the beginning of winter. And at this point of transition in the calendar, it was thought that the veil between the world of the living and that of the dead was at its thinnest. This meant that one could more easily communicate with the dead and vice versa, and the festival seems to have very much revolved around this idea. We don't know all that much with certainty about pagan practices such as this, since most of our earliest sources come from second-hand Christian writers in the Middle Ages, but we do know that certain practices like the lighting of bonfires took place, as well as the general orientation and theme of this festival. On the other hand, as a little religious movement called Christianity developed in its earliest period, they started also to have feast days commemorating and celebrating the saints and martyrs of the faith. This is thus a tradition that goes back to the very earliest days of Christianity. And when this little religion, which at this point had become the state religion of the largest empire in the world, started to spread to new lands through missionaries, there were different techniques used to convert the population in these new lands. And one of the most common and successful ways to do this has always been to meet people halfway. What I mean by this is that one would often take an already existing tradition or custom and give it new Christian meanings or Christian clothing, to Christianize customs already present in the local community. This, of course, makes it appear like conversion doesn't make one have to give up all of one's entire life and culture, and makes that process a lot more simple and appealing. One often quoted example of this is that Christmas, the celebration of Jesus' birth, was placed on December 25th in the Roman world, which was the same day that there was already an existing festival that celebrated the birth of the god Sol Invictus in the Roman Empire. This theory is widely rejected by scholars today, however, as the evidence doesn't really point in that direction anymore. But another example, one that seems a lot more likely, is that when the Christians came to the British Isles, the festival of celebrating the dead saints started to be celebrated specifically on November 1st, at the same time that the local custom of Samhain was already taking place. The connection to the world of the deceased in both of these traditions is a likely reason that the Christians chose to place the holiday at this specific time, in another attempt to appropriate local practices and incorporate them into Christianity rather than eradicate them completely. Thus, All Saints' Day as we know it was born, and eventually spread to other places in Europe and Western Christendom in general. Another name used for the holiday was Allhallows Day, which means that the day before, on October 31st, was All Hallows Eve, which is where we get the name Halloween. And on the day after All Saints' Day, on November 2nd, is celebrated All Souls' Day, a festival where one commemorates the souls of those departed in a general sense, not just the saints as such, but every soul, every faithful soul, or any person who has died or passed away is commemorated on All Souls' Day on November 2nd. This triad of days, All Hallows Eve or Halloween, All Hallows or Saints' Day, and All Souls' Day, is sometimes together referred to as Allhallowtide. So as you might imagine, the connection and difference between these three somewhat separated days can appear complicated and confusing to some people. And while it is true that the festival of Halloween originally had its origins in the pagan festival of Samhain, aside from its place in the calendar, so taking place at the same time of year, there is very little left of Samhain in what we know as Halloween. In fact, most of the things that we associate with Halloween, different rituals and imagery and so on, actually comes from later Christian periods and the celebration of All Saints' Day. So for example, trick-or-treating likely originates in a practice called souling, where groups of people would travel between houses and singing, asking for blessings or asking for prayers for the dead, as well as for objects like asking for apples or soul cakes, as it was known. And the famous jack-o'-lantern, which is kind of the poster figure for Halloween, also has its origins in these practices, as people would often carry with them hollowed out turnip lanterns as they were going from house to house. So many of these traditions actually come from a post-Christian period rather than from the pre-Christian Samhain. In any case, Halloween and All Saints' Day / All Souls' Day are usually pretty clearly distinguished today. Halloween is a pop culture-infused celebration, sometimes associated with consumerism, while All Saints and Souls' Day is a solemn Christian day of commemoration. And these days are widely celebrated across Europe even today. However, they can look pretty different depending on where. For example, All Souls' Day is also often known as the Day of the Dead, and in Mexico this has evolved into a very vibrant and unique tradition of its own, strongly flavored by local culture, as seen for example in the popular Pixar film Coco. But in a place like Sweden, which is where I'm from, the celebration of these holidays looks quite different, and it can also tell us a lot about how Swedes relate to religion and secularism. In Sweden, both Halloween and All Saints' Day are widely celebrated by people, but they are very clearly distinguished from each other most of the time. Halloween takes place on October 31st, like it always does in most places, but All Saints' Day does not actually take place on the traditional date of November 1st. Instead, since the 1950s, All Saints' Day actually takes place on the first Saturday in November. This means that every few years, the dating of these holidays do line up in the traditional way. So if Halloween falls on a Friday, on October 31st, that means that All Saints' Day will fall the next day, on Saturday, November 1st. But if Halloween falls on a Sunday, like this year, that means that All Saints' Day is celebrated almost a full week later, on November 7th, on the Saturday. It's weird, but that's how we do it over here. And in Sweden, the connected holiday of All Souls' Day, supposed to take place on November 2nd, kind of isn't really a thing. The Church of Sweden does recognize it as an official day of commemoration, but for the regular Swede, All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day are kind of mashed together. In fact, what we call All Saints' Day in Sweden is actually more akin to All Souls' Day in practice. Now, Sweden is quite a secularized country. It is often ranked among the most secularized in the world, and this is definitely true to some degree. Relatively few Swedes identify with a particular religious denomination and are often only very mildly engaged in religious questions. But as scholarship has shown, like that by scholar of religions David Turfjell, this does not mean that people don't believe in a divine higher power, for example, or that they have abandoned religious traditions. Not at all, in fact. Christian holidays like All Saints' Day, Christmas, or Easter are still very actively and passionately observed by many Swedes today, but are often drained of any outright connection to teachings or imagery from Christianity. Christmas is a big deal in Sweden, but to many, the birth of Jesus Christ isn't really that relevant or considered. For most, the holiday is about gathering together as a family, eating certain foods, getting presents, and even watching Donald Duck on television. Much more so than it has anything to do with Christ. A term that has been coined to denote this kind of phenomenon is post-Christian. Many Swedes are so-called post-Christian in the sense that they have stopped identifying with the organized religion of Christianity as such, but still engage and participate in a culture that is infused with Christianity, take part in rituals that originate in the religion, or have certain emotional attachments to these things. We love our rituals and traditions, just don't get too religious about it. All Saints' Day is the same, and that is what I mean when I say that to many Swedes, All Saints' Day is really All Souls' Day, because when All Saints' Day is celebrated, few ever think about the saints and martyrs of Christianity. Ask any Swede and they will tell you that on All Saints' Day we simply remember those who have passed. In other words, the more overtly Christian aspects of the holiday is downplayed in favor of a more general commemoration of the dead. On All Saints' Day, families will often gather together. Many will visit the graves of loved ones who have passed, perhaps a grandmother or a father. Candles are lit and placed by their graves, and the day is spent trying to remember and appreciate those loved ones who have moved on. In Stockholm in particular, it's quite common to visit a large cemetery called Skogskyrkogården. Here, as well as in many other cemeteries, most of the graves are covered with candles, creating a kind of sea of lights in the darkness, at least after the sun has set, which is quite a beautiful sight. Even if you don't have a loved one in this cemetery in particular, it has become a local custom of sorts to visit on this day, to walk around looking at the lights and the graves. It's a quite solemn atmosphere, one where people will try to give an extra thought to those who have passed, as well as mortality in general, a kind of collective memento mori. As we saw, to many people this has little to do with Christianity, but instead takes the form of a more universal and secular day of commemorating the dead, even though the tradition itself clearly does come from a Christian background. Of course, the church and those active in it will emphasize it on more clearly Christian grounds and often have services and vigils during these days in a more quote-unquote traditional way, but the varied ways that this fascinating tradition is celebrated can really show us how religions always impact and are impacted by different local contexts, but can also give us a look into the way that religion and secularism function and are in conversation with each other in contemporary post-Christian Sweden. I hope those celebrating have a meaningful All Saints and All Souls Day, and that we are blessed by the memories of those who are not with us anymore. I'll see you next time.